Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of the Great Reassessment Podcast. I am joined today by Josh Thomas. He is the founder of the School of Traditional Skills, and he also has a very successful YouTube channel called Homesteading Family. And Josh, I'm really pleased to have you here. Thanks so much.
Hey, Matthew, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on and looking forward to just talking shop, so to speak, today.
Yeah. So I'll have to tell you how I found out about you. It
Okay.
through my wife, who she has been consuming so much of the content from the School of Traditional Skills, sitting in on the webinars, watching your videos, and like I'm pretty sure like we're maybe like 6 months out because of buying our own big piece of land because of how much she's always like in my ear now, like, we need a dairy cow, we need
Yeah,
pig.
your honeydew list is growing.
Yeah, you know, and so and just the I'm just amazed at how much my wife has learned. Like, I'll come home from work and she'll be like, "Can I tell you what I learned today about multi-species rotational grazing?" And she's just like, "Yes, I'll take my shoes off and I'll pop a squat on the couch and I'd love for you to explain it to me."
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of talk about dairy cows because we have a couple of chickens right
Hmm.
now. We used to have more, but um, we have some owls, I think, in the area or something, and
Oh, yeah.
raccoons. And so we're trying to get more, but you know, so that's why I'm looking forward to talking to you. Like, so what is the School of Traditional Skills?
Well, I mean, at its base, what it is an online educational platform to teach traditional skills. So when we say traditional skills, right now we're focused on a lot of homesteading skills. So I think you could go broader than homesteading, and we will eventually, but you got to start somewhere. So we're focused on teaching a lot of homesteading skills that people are interested in. So it's about, raising your own food, whether that's in the garden or raising animals. It's about preserving that food. So all kinds of methods of preservation. Traditional cooking, a lot of people have even lost the skills of cooking well, especially cooking from scratch, cooking things they're raising, or if they're getting back to healthy eating, people may not be able to raise their own animals, but they can buy from the farmer's market, or they can just buy more whole foods, but then putting those back into healthy meals is a challenge. So that's part of it. Um, there's some other things we're teaching herbal medicine, in a few different ways. And so it's just all about building these skills that have been lost over the generations. And a lot of them have been very common to the human experience in one form or another until the Industrial Revolution. And over the course of the last 200 years, 160, however you want to frame it up, and particularly the last 70, since the end of World War II, those skills, we just traded them. We said all this technology is better and it's great. And that created dependence on massive industrial systems. And there's a research, and it has been for quite a while. I wouldn't say this is new right at this moment, but it's been growing, and I think it's going to continue to grow of people being interested in getting back to some fundamentals that connect you to the land and skills that allow you to be a little more, self-sufficient, self-resilient, whatever words you want to put on it. And so we're just about helping people learn that, and the digital, in this digital age, that online platform is the best way to reach the most people.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Who do you think, like, do you get people from like a wide range of backgrounds, or is there like one background in particular that you notice that stands out?
No, it's a wide range of backgrounds. People are choosing a different life. And so what comes with it is not the skills, it's a different life, because if you're going to use the skills, you need to apply them. And if you're going to apply them, it means you're doing some things different in your life than the traditional, the traditional modern life, as it were, right now. And so the background is wide and varied, as far as the whys and the demographics. And so there are people on little to no land, even some people that are figuring this out in urban and very tight suburban environments, all the way to people that are on any amount of acreage, from a half to 1 acre to five, to more. And And again, they're varied in income. They're varied in the walks of life. You know, we see people that are coming out of the corporate world and are redoing it all over. We see a lot of moms and a lot of families, no matter where they're at, just wanting to. I mean, some of it's inflationary, some of it's health. Gosh, there's so many reasons. Some of it's just lack of trust in our modern infrastructure and systems, and the instability in the world. And we can probably get into that a little bit. I've done some interesting research, and so I really, I mean, moms might be the biggest central demographic. It probably is. They're the caretaker of the home. They're raising the children. They're responsible for feeding the children, caring for them, and honestly, they've got a little more time maybe to be observing what's going on in the world and how does that translate to me as a mom and what I'm doing right here with my family and going, whoa. And so that's probably the largest central demographic. But when you get out from there, it's people from all walks of life and honestly all over the world. I mean, we're U.S. based, so that's our reach naturally, but organically, we've got people involved with the school. I don't know how many countries, but it's a lot.
Wow. How would you, in your like off the cuff definition, how would you define the word homestead?
Mm. Well, homesteading is making a go at providing more for yourself from your home, right? From your land generally. And, in the old legal sense, that was, legal contract with the government to take this land and improve it and make a go at it. I think today it's much more of a mindset, and it definitely for the vast majority of people, it means, some sort of piece of ground, though we encourage people to think about doing what you can where you're at. And so I like to include the thought of homesteading. You might be growing some potted plants, and you might have a chicken or two, but you're buying from the farmer's market. You're getting some of your food from the local farmer, and you're preserving that, and you're putting it up, and so you're involved in a local economy, if you were. And I think that's still leaning into the concept of resiliency and self-sufficiency, where you can, working where you're at. But most people are moving towards, a little bit of land where they can create some of their own sustenance and create some resiliency and, a whole lot of other things, honestly, from just living a different life that it fosters family values and a whole lot of stuff like that.
Yeah. Just in my personal experience, it has been a journey. Like you learn one thing and it sends you and you learn like five more as a result of that. And then next thing you know, like 2 years later, your whole life looks different. And I can't imagine like fully committing to a piece of land. Like right now, I think I really trying to lean into that sufficiency aspect, with like, acquiring grain from, somewhere that's locally sourced or having chickens,
Mm-hmm.
have a garden. But do you think it has to take place that way? Because like, I imagine you can't just do that overnight or maybe because it's a lot of work too. And I can't even imagine like, have you ever seen somebody try to do it overnight and get discouraged?
Oh, definitely. I've seen, there have been a lot of people that have gone all in from no knowledge and, you know, they sell their house, they sell everything, they go out in the country, they're going to go off grid and, kind of totally go off grid and power, water, food, do it all. And that's a recipe for disaster. Very few people are successful that way. And honestly, that's usually a fear mentality. Somebody's responding out of fear. And I think there are a lot of things that cause fear that people are responding to turn to this way of life. But then you need to take that fear and respond to it measurably, right? And that's kind of the truth in anything in life. And so most people, understandably and reasonably so, are biting off little chunks at a time. And, some go faster, some go slower. But there is a reality to, even if you had all the money in the world, you can't tackle and get your head and your life around everything. So, um, you know, most people are starting where they're at and picking up skills that they can do. And some people, chickens for animals is a gateway. Some people can do that. Some people can't. They can buy bulk food from the farmer's market or even the grocery store and preserve it, and create some food resiliency while learning to build a skill and eating healthy, And so there's a ton of entry points. But yeah, overnight is, thankfully, that's the smaller amount of people that are choosing that. And it's certainly really risky to go at it that way, even though there's a lot of motion driving, people into this lifestyle.
Yeah. How did you get into all of it? Like, did you grow up on a farm or on a homestead? Like, what's your story?
No, that's a long story. So, I know we got a lot of things we want to get to, so I'll try to keep it abbreviated. But I grew up in and out of town. I grew up in a broken family, and my mom was in town, and my dad was always out in the country somewhere, but not, horses here and there, and just out in the country, not really living any kind of farming life. But I had a little exposure here and there, and my grandma gardened, and so there were these little bits, but I naturally gravitated as I got older towards the country. And my wife didn't grow up in a broken home, but she grew up in the city, and then her family moved to the country, and they had chickens and did a little gardening, and it was a little more for enjoyment. It was a little more hobby farming, if you will. But she still got an element, of those pieces. And we got married and honestly went to the city. We were in Southern California, and she was finishing a degree. I was starting a construction company. Work was where the people were. And we figured this is just what we got to do. This is kind of the American, dream and what you're supposed to do, and go finish school and get your careers. And so we thought, well, it'll be nice if we could move out to the outskirts one day. And, and that was the kind of starting of our life. And I mean, the short of it is we had our first child, and he had a reaction to a vaccine, and it was mild, thankfully. But it opened our eyes because we watched them give him 3 shots. We didn't really think about it too much, just trusting, the system doing what they're telling us to do. And went home, he had a reaction, and she called in the next day, find out, what had they given him. So she's a good researcher. So she's like, I want to find out what they gave him. I can do a little research, And they only told her 2 things. And she's like, well, what's the third thing? And they're like, there wasn't anything. And we were both there. They gave him 3 shots, and yet they only had 2 on record. And they insisted that she didn't know what she was talking about. Basically, I mean, without calling her a liar, said she didn't know what she was talking about. That was for us, like, whoa, what are we participating in? What is this? And so that opened the door to a lot of questioning. And, there's other people that have been through scenarios like that have some really bad stories where it's really gone wrong. We're blessed that there was some sort of reaction, but it never manifested in any major thing. He's 20 now and married and doing great. But it opened our eyes to looking at the world a little bit differently. We were already bent that way. She already knew she wanted to homeschool. We had our own business, kind of, doing our own things, a little bit of that libertarian, I'd say cowboy approach to life. And that just opened our eyes and started doing a lot of research. And it honestly caused some distrust in the medical system. So started doing a lot of research, and that led to food and what's in our food and how is it being produced. And like, whoa, wow, a lot of these problems evident because of the systems that we have that aren't really looking out for our interests. And the core of it in the beginning was, this coincides with a faith journey as well, in walking out our faith and giving that to God, and then realizing, well, we really need to feed our kids well. We need to get off the normal grocery store diet, high processed foods diet. We, by this point, knew we were going to have a large family, or likely to, and that just led us to, well, we're going to need to probably raise a lot of this food, as much of it we can ourselves. And that was really the beginning, basically 20 years ago, and started us on that journey from, having enjoyed it with her experience and a little touch of country life to, whoa, this is something we need to do. And it just grew over time. Our knowledge grew, our looking at the world around us, and how does the food system work? How does the medical system work? How is the government involved in these things? more and more just led us to building a life of not just self-sufficiency. I don't like that word a whole lot because I don't think any of us are an island, but to building a resilient life that is healthy, is abundant, and is freed up to a degree from the grids, right? And ironically, the electric grid we're still on. One day we'll get off, but we felt it was better to get less dependent on the medical grid, the educational grid, the food grid, some of these things. And so that's just been a journey over the 20 years, and it's just been a slow growth, like we were talking about, of adding in skills and adding in knowledge and stepping up in land over time, from an apartment in the city to a quarter acre to 5 acres, and we're on 40 now. So it's been a journey.
Was there ever a moment that you saw like, okay, there's no going back after this point? Was there like a distinct moment, or was it always kind of like a slow build? Or was there a moment where you're like, okay, as soon as we're all in after this?
There is a point where it consumes you. And I mean, there's a couple points in life. One of them was when we stepped up to 5 acres, and I'm a builder in my background. So I used to build custom homes. We bought some raw land early 2000s and built our own home. And so now we're operating in another scale, and it definitely began to consume us. The amount of effort, we had to give up a lot of other things. We weren't going to be putting our time and our money into other things if we were going to do this. And that's probably the first moment where we realized, we were all in. And I don't even know if homesteading was a word we used then. But we realized, like, well, we got to make a decision. Is this the life we're going to live? Are we committed to this? Or is this just something to play around with? Because there's not a lot of in between. You can kind of hobby it and have a little fun and do a little bit, but you're not really, building resiliency and building a life around it. You're just kind of doing it where it fits in. And through prayer, through just a whole lot of things, it was, no, we're committed to this, and this is the life we want to live. This is the life we want to raise our kids in. It became important to us to raise children that saw themselves as producers, not consumers. Our whole economy and our whole mindset today is based on consumerism, and that's not survivable for an individual, a family, all the way up to a nation. You can't consume more than you produce. Eventually, there's an end to that. That doesn't work. And so this lifestyle, we realized, was very beneficial for raising the kids the way we wanted to, and teaching them to work and to produce value and bring value into the world, not just consume everything the world's throwing at you.
Sure. So what does your average day look like? I kind of want to hear about, like, how many animals do you got? What are you doing first thing in the morning? And kind of walk us through that.
Well, right now we're bundling up because it was 6 degrees this morning.
Sure.
We've got a barn full of animals. They all come to the barn in the winter. We've kind of got just about all the normal animals, and you don't need to do that to homestead, but for a variety of reasons, we've got pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, geese, beef cows, dairy cows, meat chickens when it's in season, dogs and cats, of course. And, a day in the life of, in the wintertime right now, it's getting up and get the fires going in the house. And we kind of structure the house where everybody's got a little bit of quiet time as people are older. And then it's to chores usually first thing. And when you're taking care of animals, they've got priority in the morning. So before we're eating, or even before I'm having coffee or anything, we're out doing chores. And we've got a large family, so there's some of us that go out and do chores. There's some people that get the house going and get meals going for the day and get the house humming along while we do that. And that all starts at this time of year, about 7, when we're getting to chores. A little earlier in the summer, chores a little longer. They're a little shorter right now. There's not as much to do. And then we spend time together as a family around the breakfast table. And I know a lot of families spend dinner time, which we do most of the time, but breakfast is our priority. We get our start together in the day because, especially with older kids, it's when we're all home and we're all there and we're fresh and we're not tired. So that's the place where we consolidate at least once a day. Everybody's there before we go out into the day and work work on the homestead, homeschool, play, whatever it is we're doing.
Yeah. So how many kids do you have, if you don't mind me asking?
11,
You have 11?
11 kids. Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole
Yeah.
nother story in and of itself, but it's part of this journey.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's like the youngest versus the oldest?
The oldest is 20 actually today. Happy birthday, Tristan. I don't know if he'll ever hear this, but he's 20 today. He's the oldest. And the youngest is 22 months.
Wow.
And yeah, and we have one adopted in there. And they're amazing. They're an amazing group of people. So we've got two adults. Our third son, he'll be 18 this summer. So we're more on the phase of them. They're coming into adulthood and starting to step into their own things.
That is amazing. I like 11 kids. I have 3 kids, and one was born about 2 months ago.
Yeah, all right.
Like just a complete side question, just as a parent, like, is there a moment like where you felt like, because one is like you go from having no kids to having a kid,
Mm-hmm.
huge shock. Two, you have a plurality now. You're going from a single to multiple.
Yeah,
2 to 3 is now you're outnumbered.
right.
Like, is there like is there a moment where it's just kind of like 6, 7, 8, 9? Like, is there like those big shocks, or like, because there's always like obviously like the newborn phase, which is a challenge in and of itself. Like, there's a lot of work to be done, but like after a certain point, is it kind of cyclical? Like, there's older kids now kind of helping like through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Carol and I would probably have different answers because I'm not the one carrying all those kids and nursing them and getting them going in those younger years, particularly where they need so much of mama's attention. So she's going to have a different view. But I remember 4 and 5 being probably the hardest place, and ours came quick. For us, it was an act of faith. It wasn't about how many. It was just about, okay, God, we're committing to give over our finances and do these areas of our life, and we just felt Him ask us, well, what about your family? Is that, you're surrendering all these other things. And so for us, that was just a step of faith. But it became clear that we were probably going to have a large family. I've known people that have done that and they've had no kids or one kid with the same perspective we have. But it became clear that children were going to come along. They were coming pretty quickly. So at 4 and 5 years, there's a lot going on. And yeah, we're outnumbered and the kids aren't old enough to really help a whole lot, and they all still need a lot of help. They're not even very autonomous yet in dressing themselves and whatnot. So there was an area somewhere in there where it was probably toughest. I think as soon as we started getting some kids up into the 8 and 9 year old, a couple more along the way, you also just, another one doesn't rock the numbers so much. You've gotten used to dealing with what you're dealing with. Now they're starting to get helpful. And by helpful, I mean at that age, they're more able to take care of themselves. So they're not, you don't have to do as much for them. Though our kids started early just doing little things to help, and we just made that a part of life. That was part of homeschooling. And so they really were being helpful without really even trying to make it a big deal. And then as they get to be teenagers, it really becomes helpful. So there's definitely shifts over a period of time. And 3 in there, if they're close together, that's tough. You're outnumbered and they all need help. Every one of them needs help getting dressed. Every one of them needs help getting fed. They make messes. And yeah, it's a lot in those early years.
I can only imagine just like how sweet it is to have all of you around one table. So as you were talking about breakfast.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. And now it's even sweeter because we've got one out of the house and he's married. And so when they're home, and actually we just had our first grandchild, so we're really excited, or we didn't have, but they did, right? Yeah. And so got our first grandchild. And so this was the first Thanksgiving, which is one of our big times of the year, to not just be together, but to celebrate a new generation.
Yeah. I mean, maybe kind of like an Abraham moment.
Yeah.
Like, just, what a beautiful thing that is to see. That's a good segue, actually. My wife, who watches a lot of the videos from the school traditional skills, like something you guys talk about is like a family home economy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's occasionally some Christian speakers, pastors
Mm-hmm.
bring their 2 cents, and like whereas like everyone's kind of got their hand on the same plow. What do you think that that does for a family and why it's important?
Well, it's really the original foundation of society, of culture, is the family economy. And my friend Rory Groves can speak to this much better than I can, and he'd be somebody you'd probably love to interview and talk to, um, specifically about the family economy. But really, all of culture and society was originally built around the family economy and families working together. That's the foundation of culture. It's not individuals, it's small groups of people working together, and that's the family unit. And then that extends out and grows into broader, cultural structure, if you will. Um, but families were made to be just inherently productive. You didn't survive if you weren't productive together. And so from just a kind of a resource economic basis, just looking at siloing it, looking at that from that angle, we've lost the need for that today with all our technology and all our industrialization. It's not necessary. The family isn't really necessary. What does that do to the psychology of people? What does that do to the psychology of a child? A child isn't really needed in the family in today's world. We've got all the tools and all the aids and government schools and or somebody and something to take care of everybody. And so the lack of it is part of, not solely, but I think it's part of the downfall of our culture and some of the problems we see with our culture. Is the family's been broken up, and I mean, we certainly think of the moral terms of how that's happened, but it's happened structurally in other ways as well. And when you have an operating family economy where the family's working together for a common good, and particularly something productive. I mean, even if you can just be mostly working together for something, enjoying together, that's a step in the right direction where everybody's not just going to their phones in the different rooms or whatever. But when you can work together for a common goal and it's a productive goal, um, the value that brings to the individuals that are in that family, the self-worth, all of a sudden you're needed. Our children grow up knowing they're needed and wanted. They have a role to play. And now we have to be forward in encouraging that and acknowledging that, right? Not just taking for granted that they help and do chores on the homestead and whatever, but we celebrate that, and there's a million ways we do that. Around the table, of course, is a place to celebrate. And we think about, whoa, who tended this corn, or who tended the sheep out in the pasture this year. And that always leads to different stories. And all of a sudden there's all this camaraderie and value placed on individual people about what we did together, and yet celebrated how the individuals contributed to the whole. And that I think you paint that picture and you go, wow, what a picture to build a society on and a culture on that healthy family unit that's economically sound.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just the phrase that's coming to my mind as you're talking is it's just good. It's
Yeah.
just this level of goodness that I can't even help but smile at.
It's what we were made for, it was what we were designed for. And it's a shame. And that's been part of our journey, is learning that and figuring out how to rebuild that, because we believe that's what we were, humanity was made to function in that way. And that's why I think it just, you think about that or you see that and you go, oh man, that's just good. That's just right.
So I kind of want to ask you, there's someone like yourself and your lifestyle. Obviously, you depend on the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And its cycles and the weather. And then there's other people who claim to have a deep care for the earth, right?
Oh.
They think we're destroying the earth. They think, if we continue on this path, we're gonna melt the polar ice caps and we're all gonna be doomed.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the similarity between them is that they both care about the earth and they care
Mm-hmm.
about nature. Although, where do you think, like, why is there such a difference functionally and like outwardly, like where one is pessimistic and will vandalize in protests? They claim to care about the earth, whereas your lifestyle, obviously, you care about the earth, care about nature, care about the health of the land, but it doesn't result in this pessimistic, nihilistic, I want to go vandalize
Yeah.
worldview. Like, where do you talk to me about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, they're fundamentally different worldviews, but I think let's go back to the beginning a little bit and work our way toward that. I believe that humanity was made, and we were made with a purpose, and that purpose was to fellowship with God and to enjoy what He made for us, being this earth. And so we were made in connection with the earth to take care of it, to work with it. It looked different at one time than it does now, but in how that worked, but that was our purpose. So that's innate in who we are. And so I think that's why, I mean, there's very few people that would say they don't ever want to go experience nature or connect with nature. You know, we're drawn to that. Even if you enjoy dwelling in the city, I believe because we were made that way. And we were given the responsibility to take care of what was made. We're stewards of it. And so I think there is an innate understanding that we have a responsibility for this earth that's made inside of us. Now, where it diverges is that I think all of humanity has that understanding. And as we've gotten enough technology to realize and see the bigger picture of what we're doing to the earth and our different practices, I think it's understandable for any human being to go, whoa, some of these things aren't right. They're not good. We're not being good stewards. But there's two worldviews. Some of those people are coming at that worldview not from accountability to a creator, but to this world and this humanity is all we've got. And yes, they might use the language responsible, but it's not responsible so much as a steward as it is to, like, we're in this together. If we destroy this earth, that's it. And so I think there's a lot more dynamics to that, but I think that's kind of a hopeless view. I mean, if there's nothing but this earth, and we know that we are doing some serious damage to it, where does that end? There's no good end to it. So it's hopeless, as you referenced. Where there are others of us that believe that we were created, we were made for a purpose, we're made to steward this, we have a responsibility, we're waking up to that responsibility. But we have hope in where we're going before our Creator and where He's taking us. And so we can do it within measure and without fear. I think other than we should have a godly fear of that we are accountable to somebody for taking care of our little plot in the world. And I don't think as humans and even as Christians that we've necessarily done that well over the generations. But we have hope through that. We know there's more to the story. And yet we should have even a deeper responsibility to care for that. So those two different worldviews are going to manifest themselves differently.
Yes, I think I agree with everything you said, but it seems like the one worldview, they actually place nature above God.
They do. They usually do. And you know, here's the thing. We're all looking for something to elevate, aren't we? Even when we say we don't believe in a God, we're looking for something to elevate. And I that's just human history. Human history goes and finds a God. And those people wouldn't call it their God, but people go and find a God because we were made to worship a God, I believe. And so if you don't believe in the God that we're talking about, you're going to go and find one. And so I think inherently, yes, the creation becomes, greater than the creator, if you will, in some minds. And I think we just have to have understanding for where they're at, because they're actually responding to something that's appropriate, that's in their human nature. But the answer is wrong, the why, I guess, is more wrong. The answer might be right in like, hey, we need to take better care of this. But then because our worldview is off, we get into some extremism. We get into some things that don't even ethically stand up to that worldview when you start getting violent or so much like this is a God, and a lot of problems arise. out of that worldview.
Yeah, and I imagine as you are working the land, you're acquiring an appreciation for it to, hey, if I'm not taking care of this well, my family's well-being could be at stake. And so we actually have to steward it well.
Yeah. Well, and we have to think multi-generationally, and I think that's another thing we've lost in our Western culture is we don't think out very far. We're kind of thinking of our generation and kind of quasi thinking about the next generation. I mean, we care about our kids and we want to see them do well, but are we really working to make sure that what we pass on, they can pass on so that their kids can pass it on? I don't think we think that way very much.
Yeah.
And when you get connected to the land, at least for me, I can't speak for, other people's perspectives, but it's caused me to think more and more about, man, I got to make sure and pass this on to the next generation. Not just the land itself, but the care of it and the thought process that they would carry forward, whether they're on this land or hopefully land somewhere else,
Yeah.
that they would carry forward these values. And again, that's part of building human culture that's healthy, that stems out of that family economy.
I bet you learn a lot of lessons just in randomly as you're working the land. For example, I have a lot of weeds in my, like, next to my driveway. And as I'm picking the weeds, something just hit me where it's like picking weeds is kind of like pulling out sin out of life, right? And it's like there's usually a lot more than you think, and you got to get it by the root, unless it might come back. Things like that just like they're very like they're agricultural, but they have a lot of spiritual ties. Do you find yourself like picking up those little
Sure.
nuggets all day, like out?
Yeah. Well, and weeds is I mean, it's a real good one. And especially within the modern dialogue with more people gardening, people always want to get rid of the weeds, right? And of course you do. They're in your way. And I think what's interesting is through working with nature. So I work to practice permaculture, which works with nature. And through working with nature, you can minimize the weeds. You're not ever going to get 100% rid of them. Not in this current state of the earth and humanity, but you can drastically reduce them. You can get closer to being in that harmony, say, that we're looking for of no weeds. And I think that parallels a journey for the Christian in that in this life, we're not going to reach perfection, right? There's going to be weeds. There's going to be sin. As we conform to God's ways, we can reduce those weeds. The sin will reduce. The abundance will increase. We're not going to get there 100%. That's going to take Christ returning and finishing the work, and he will get us there. But we can get much closer, and that's part of sanctification in our journey. And so I see that right in that discussion of the weeds and how God's nature reflects, or natural laws, say, reflect spiritual laws in that way. And to me, that's a fun connection to see between creation and spiritual principles, and how there's a lot of, you can look at them either direction and see an echo of truth.
Yeah. It's very glaring, and maybe that's why part of our society has become so godless, is because people aren't interacting with nature as much.
Oh, yeah. I think so. I think you're naturally in tune with the Creator, right? If you're more reliant on the creation for your daily sustenance, you are going to be a little more in tune with reality of natural order, which spans not just what we talk about as nature, but the spiritual world as well. Because they're working, they're together, they're created together, they're working together. The more you get into the city, it's man. It's man around you. There's very little nature, and it's all what man has done. And doesn't it make sense that, and again, nothing against the city or there's anything wrong with the city, but when everything's man-made, does that you tend to see and are immersed in what man has made, what man has done? And I would know for me, and I've spent a little bit of time in the city and certainly visited big cities, it's like, whoa, this is all glory to man. If you exist in that all the time, you see that more. And I know personally, I would have to work a lot harder, in that world, because there's all the conveniences, there's all the things at your fingertips. You don't have the struggles. You can go, I mean, some cities you can go around the city without ever going outside. You don't have to experience the elements. There's just there's a huge difference in the experience.
One person I listen to fairly often is Al Mohler.
Yeah,
And
briefing.
yes, love the brief. And he, one time he said, he's like, kind of exactly what you're talking about. If you're trying to raise cows, you need a male cow and you need a female cow. You can't circumvent that. And in the city of man, you see that everywhere. That people trying to circumvent
Sure.
this natural order.
Well, we're becoming as gods. I mean, it's honestly Babylonian looking, or Babylonian Tower of Babel, right? That idea that we can build our way up, and it's certainly fraught with dangers that take us to relying more in man's ways. I mean, look at medicine. We can answer so many things, and there's a lot of great things. There's a lot of things that I love, but we're going to man's answers and not to God's first a lot of times. And so a lot of those things I wouldn't give up. I don't say they're wrong, but bring it back a little simpler. I can go down in the grocery store, or I'm thinking about what's growing in my garden so that I can go to my pantry in the winter to get food. There's a big difference in how that shapes your perception of value in life and things around you.
Tell me, what is your favorite meal to eat
That's terrible.
that is completely sourced from your land? And maybe you can give me two, like your top two favorites.
Wow. Well, I'm not really a meat and veggies guy, so and I'm a steak guy overall. I like my beef. I like all of it, but I like my beef. So, a great steak with a fresh salad and fresh veggies, and of course when it's fresh, I mean it's great. It's fine. It's been out of the pantry or whatever, but in the winter. But when we've got a steak that was raised out in the pasture that I see, and vegetables from the garden and the salad, potatoes, whatever, just kind of that core kind of meal that we think about. But definitely a steak is heavily involved in that. I like red meat. And so that's definitely one of my favorites. And it's been an interesting journey to watch our plate shift over. We kind of, we have to remind ourselves real hard now, because we've been doing this long enough, that the vast majority of our meals are 80 to 90%, from the property. And I remember when we were like, whoa, there's two things on the plate now, and so it's been a journey. But yeah, steak is definitely one. I don't know, we love our home raised pork as well. It's phenomenal. So good pork roast or some good bacon.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I never had a cow, but I've been going over to a friend's house who, he raised a cow, or maybe they got one from a friend, and you can really just taste a big difference in a cow that was pasture raised, wasn't fed any testing hormones or given vaccines.
Yeah.
And you can even, looking at the meat itself, it just looks different.
Yeah. Yeah. The fat content is usually a little different. A grass-fed cow that's been raised well is going to have a little yellower fat often, and a little different texture. Now, it can come out not good. There's definitely some things to raising them well. You can have a bad experience when it gets to beef and grass-finished beef, but it can be also excellent. If you like beef, there's a great book, and it's probably 15 years old now, called Steak. And it's a little side note, but it's a fun read if you really like beef and you want to look at how beef has been produced and cooked all over the world. This food journalist went and traveled all over the world and experienced beef from many different countries, raised different ways. And it's fun. It's a fun read, and very educational too.
So one of the main objectives of this podcast is just to sort of lean in and talk about themes that we see in our culture that people are sort of turning their back on this old postmodern way of life, or at least giving up the way that postmodernism, secularism has influenced. And I think we're at the beginning. I think right now we're at the beginning of a turning point. Do you think, like, why do you think there's such a big resurgence or a fascination in homesteading, homeschooling, marriage? Because a lot of these things are on the uptick.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll try to paint a broad brush here because you could go into so many specifics with these, and afterwards we can follow some trails if you want. But there's a cycle to nations, right? You're familiar with that from slavery, and I don't remember the terms, but you one of the key ones and what we're experiencing now is going from being very successful, from free to building up a healthy culture. Then you start to get apathetic, you get used to it, you start to not take care of it, you take it for granted, and you start to move toward bondage. And we are, and I believe in our American culture, our culture is deteriorating. We're watching a lot of things deteriorate, and people know that. It's been going on for a while, but people are more willing to talk about it. Some of the recent events in the last few years highlight it. And what happens historically, and I did some research when we were starting the School of Traditional Skills to look at back to land movements, because we had one in the 60s, and I don't know if people know it, but there was a bit of one in the 20s around after the Great Depression or right in there somewhere. And actually, there have been back to land movements going back at least to the fall of the Roman Empire, and even some evidences in the fall of Mesopotamia. And so there is what I've come to believe is a natural movement. When we do well, when culture is doing well, more people go to the city. They go to the conveniences. They go to where the bustle is. They go to where the entertainment is. There's work. There's a living to be made, and there's all kinds of things happening in the more populated areas, and that's natural. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just kind of the natural flow, and you get disconnected from the land. But when that culture starts to deteriorate for whatever reason, morality, economics, instability of governments, people start to go back to their roots, so to speak, right? To use the terminology that we often use today, they go back to the land. They go back to their roots because they inherently understand that's safety, that's secure, that's grounded. And last few verses in Proverbs 27 talks about this, about knowing well the state of your flocks, because governments and money systems, and I'm paraphrasing a whole lot here, but governments and money systems don't last. They fall apart over time, and we see that cycle. And so I believe that we're just in one of those periods where we're collectively realizing, and we're getting momentum in it, that this system that we have has got some problems, and it's not taking care of us the way we want it to, and it's not as secure as we thought it was or we would like it to be. And so people are coming back to foundations of building, of getting well-rooted again. And so I think there's a million reasons inside of all of that of why, but I think that's kind of the overview of what's happening. And I think you're very right. We just, more and more people are realizing that we need to get back to our roots. We need to get back to what's real and what's steady. And here's another piece in some of my research. People that are connected to the land, they go when a culture goes through economic hard times, rich or poor, if you have land and you know how to utilize that land, and by having it, I don't necessarily mean owning it. You have access to it. You can use it. Whatever your economic circumstances are, rich or poor, you fare better. Families fare better, individuals fare better through crisis than people that don't. And we collectively know that.
Yeah, I believe that because you have a way out. You have a resource where you could start planting food if you needed to. You can get food. I think one thing, especially young men should do, and I hope this trend continues, is marriage, because it makes a world of difference if in the meantime, and I'm experiencing this right now, where if you go to work all day, you don't really have time to research and plan and get that education. But like in my situation, I'm going to work and I'm providing for my family, in that way now, but it's like my wife is able to do all the research and plan and get some ideas and run them by me, and it's just really hard to do all of that by yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We're not made to be self-sufficient. We're not made to go it alone. You're completely right. In the very pure sense, family and a husband and wife is the foundation for society and for family and culture. And so, yeah, you want a partner
Yeah.
to journey through together.
I read this book. It was on philosophy, and I wouldn't endorse everything it said, but there's parts of it where they talk about how man, to it, as close as he can achieve true happiness, is as close as he can make himself like God. And so, what are the attributes of God? Well, God possesses everything that is good in its perfected state at all times. He's completely self-sovereign. And as we get like tastes of those attributes, whether it's like self-sufficiency, which will never be perfectly self-sufficient ever, but by getting married and you can do more together, you can be a little bit more self-sufficient. And as I'm talking to you, I'm like, as you have land and you're able to live off the land, you can be a little bit more self-sufficient. You don't rely on somebody else as much. And like, there's just all those things, and like your health might improve. And that also is one of those corollaries that kind of feeds into that. And so, you know, we strive to be like God. We never will be. But there's sort of like this, you can get little tastes of it. And I think that can help to contribute to one's own happiness on this earth. And obviously, if you put your faith in Christ and you are saved from the wages of sin, you're free from the weight of sin.
For
And
sure.
and so like all those things, I don't really know what I'm saying, but like, yeah, you can't go it alone is kind of after all that.
We're not made to go it alone, and we're not made to go it without God. I would say that we're made to have relationship with God, and so we're on this journey getting closer to Him. And the more closer to Him, the more we're going to be what He made us to be. The more we're serving Christ, right? Christ said, "Go out and make disciples." He didn't say just go get people saved. He said make disciples to learn to be like Christ, and that's to learning to be more like God. And to be closer to Him. And so I think, yeah, that's where we find our fulfillment. And for most people, I think the natural order within the Christian faith, unless you're called to ministry as an individual, which some people are, but outside of that, the normal order is to go and get married, because that's what God made us, and that's what He started with, and that's where we find some of our wholeness and and ability to carry on, to procreate and to create. Yeah.
My final question for you is, have you seen that new movie, The Homestead?
Yes, I have.
What did you think about it?
Oh man, I thought a lot of things. I think as a whole, it's a great movie. I really enjoyed it. I haven't tracked, so I got to go to the premiere, so I get to know some of the folks that were involved with it, and we got invited to the premiere and got to see it a little bit ahead of time and thoroughly enjoyed it. What I love about it is the message that they're sending and the things that they're dealing with. From the overall, so there's two kind of points to that. I mean, there's kind of the overall struggle that they present, and that if you follow the series and it goes on, they'll continue to present is, working these things out and working them out before God. And, are we going to take care of ourselves first and hunker down, or are we going to serve humanity? And so there's some core questions in there of how are we going to answer these things under duress. And then there's a lot of individual circumstantial situations that they're dealing with that for me, for somebody who lives out a bit, who's got property, we started this in Southern California and we were in the mountains, but I was like, man, if the world does ever go rough, we're a magnet, people are going to be at the gate, so to speak. And it refreshed my thinking of just how do we handle that? And how do we handle these individual, situations? And so I think it's very, very rich in that, in exploring these concepts. And I think the further along you are in your homesteading journey, there's more and more relatable. And I've had a couple conversations with Jason Ross, who wrote the book that the movie was founded on. He actually spoke at our last summit. And he summed it up in something that really struck with me. And one of his mottos is prepare to share. And so it's going beyond preparing to take care of yourself. It's going beyond taking care of your own. And of course, that's what the movie is exploring. And there's challenges with that. There's real challenges in faith and sharing, but that really challenged me in my own thinking and my own focus as a believer in Christ. It's not supposed to just be looking out for myself or my own family. It's like, how do we think about these things if we're pursuing this life? We think it's a better life, but we do. And I do. I think we're definitely in an environment where there are a variety of things that can go wrong and cause us some larger problems besides the kind of overall trajectory. We're too dependent on the flick of the switch of the light bulb and water and 3 days of food in the grocery store and, just all these things. And so it's really challenging in that. And I enjoyed it in that. What about you? Did you see it? And what did you
I
think?
did see it. I bought 10 tickets to the premiere, and we took a bunch of friends, and it was there. Yeah. The undertone of the message was great, and it was incredibly entertaining too, just from and for an entertainment perspective. How realistic it is, I don't know, but that's a movie, but the message at the core I thought was really great. And I'm just encouraged that a lot of these Christian movies or Christian inspired movies don't suck anymore. They were so bad for long. Like, they're getting some good actors, the writing is good, and the quality of the shot is so much better. And so, like, there's actually a budget behind this stuff now, whereas before there were some really atrocious movies. Like, and I'm really glad that it wasn't unrealistic in the sense that they say, because a lot of previous Christian movies, you'd have this big dilemma and they would say, well, just pray to Jesus and it'll all just go. Right. Which we want people to turn to Christ, but like in the heat of a moment, like bullets flying over your head, like it's just not, I don't want to say it's not realistic, right? Because we always have our faith, but there's usually more decisions that need to be made, more action that needs to be taken than just quietly throwing up a prayer and then just doing nothing.
Right.
And so I was relieved. There was the Christian undertones, which were great, but man, it just made me optimistic that maybe there's some really great movies, more to come down the road.
Well, there are, and I think Angel Studios is doing, a great job with trying to create, good movies, good media, but that also makes you think, like that one did. And I think you really said it well, and just, that movie doesn't just like, oh, let's pray and it just goes all right. And I think if people don't know, the movie is the beginning of a series. And that's one of the things that's a little bit odd about the movie, because the story wasn't quite told and wrapped up the way a regular box office movie would be done, because it was meant to lead into a series. So the storyline is a little different. But they're leading you on this journey. I think of a part of the longer journey in there is exploring exactly what you're talking about. How does your faith to follow God and trust act out when it's not so simple, as the decision in your heart might be so simple as to trust God, but the workings out of it, you can't just leave that alone and behind, because it has consequences. There's consequences, like in the movie when they open the gate and let everybody in, and they're going to continue to explore that. And yeah, we need more in that in media that helps us talk about and think about those realities.
Absolutely. Well, Can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed this conversation with you, Josh. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. And it was just a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, likewise, Matthew. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on, and it's been a great conversation. And I wish you well on your homesteading journey. Yeah, and I look forward to hearing what you guys take on and what you do. And blessings.
Yeah. So for people who are interested, they want to nibble or they want to just dive right into the like, how can they reach you or how can they learn about what you do? Because one thing you mentioned was the herbal medicines, like learning how to do that at home. And I think there's a lot of people out there that they might want to learn
Yeah.
how to do that, or they might want to learn how to raise animals. So where can people find your work?
Yeah. Schooloftraditionalskills.com is the best place to go. You can always track us on Facebook or Instagram, YouTube as well. We don't do as much there. Hopefully we'll in the future, but go to the website, check it out. You're talking about herbs. We've got a treating first aid. So it's a first aid class, but where it's appropriate, treating with herbs, cold and flus, and then along with a whole lot of other things. So check that out. Make sure if you go there, at least get on our email list and you can stay up to date with what we're doing, because we have the school, which is a paid membership, but we also do usually monthly free trainings and the annual summit and things like that. And also check out homesteadingfamily.com as well. And that's our kind of roots channel that my wife and I started. And great YouTube channel there, and lots of resources on the blog there as well.
Yeah, well, maybe we can meet you and your wife in person one of these days.
Hey, you're not very far away, so you ever making a day drive up and want to come say hi? You got my email.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Josh. You have a wonderful day.
You too, Matthew.